What is up, everybody? I hope you are having a fantastic evening. It is Tuesday, which means I got my guy, So Real Sunil, in the building. And the 49ers have just made their final roster, kind of. I think there are some more moves to come. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about who made it. We'll talk about who didn't make it. Are there any surprises? Plus, we have a heck of a lot more. We're going to get to it all next. All right. Welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. And it's Tuesday evening. I got my guy, So Real Sunil, in the building. What's up, Sunil?
Jesse, when your intro is going on, do you get to see me?
I do, yeah.
This is the first time I got to see you. And for those, I'm going to give you some insider knowledge right now. Jesse rocks out to his intro. He is dancing, bobbing his head. I usually do, but I was so amazed because I never usually get to see Jesse. He usually pulls up the intro when I'm here. So that was great. That made my day.
Hey, you got to get ready for the show, man. It's got to be ready to rock. Hell yeah. You know, it's really weird because when I do solo shows, I don't usually wear the earpiece.
Uh-huh.
So when I hit the intro, I don't hear anything. It's just silence for me.
Uh-huh.
And so it's kind of weird sitting there waiting for it to end. And then, because there's nobody to talk to, you know what I mean? Unless I'm doing a call in. So there's no point in wearing an earpiece. I don't know. It's just interesting. And I hate to hear myself talk.
Yeah.
That's annoying to hear you. I mean, you already hear yourself, but now you're hearing it through an earpiece. So anyways, but yes, definitely. It's funny because I saw you laugh. I'm like, oh, I think you can see me right now.
Yeah. Like I said, this is the
Not
first
normal.
time. So I was like, if you've been watching me, I'm always rocking out to your intro. But
yeah,
this time I got to see you. So it was interesting. That was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let me actually present. I'm going to share the entire screen over here. Do this. Change the brand for a second. And there we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. Little share screen. Can you see it okay, Sunil?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay. So we're going to go over who actually made the roster. And of course, naturally, there are some guys that didn't make it that we'll definitely want to talk about as well as we go through this. So first things first, keeping three quarterbacks. I don't think there's any surprises here. It's Brock Purdy, Josh Dobbs, Brandon Allen. The question is, who's going to be the backup and who's going to be the starter? I haven't heard that announced yet. I think it should be Joshua Dobbs. Do you agree with that? Disagree with that? What are your thoughts?
Are we being serious right now?
Yeah. I mean, the 49ers are being serious. They haven't announced like backup.
Well, clearly, as you can see, Dobbs is listed first. So if we're trying to be, detail oriented and read between the lines, we clearly know that the quarterback that has taken them to back-to-back NFC championships and, made it to a Super Bowl is in question as whether or not he is the starter going into next season.
I think maybe it's by jersey number, but we'll go with your conspiracy theory that because in this case, Joshua Dobbs is the starter. So
yeah. I don't know if you misspoke because you were like, you don't know who was listed as the starter and who was listed as the backup. Was that what you were asking?
No. I mean, who's second string and who's third string?
Oh, okay. Because you said you didn't know Dobbs who the starter was and who the backup was. That's why I was
like, oh, did I say that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My bad. Okay. Confused. Yeah, definitely misspoke. Come on. You're supposed to know what I mean. Yeah.
I was like, the one position, Jesse, we have absolutely no debate on. Finally, you're trying to start a debate. I see how Last Second Sports does, but
yeah. Do you think Mordecai should have made this team over Allen? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think based off of last year when they traded Trey Lance and kept Sam Darnold, the way Shanahan sees the position, I think is sometimes different from how we see the position. I would assume that it would be Josh Dobbs just because of his experience as a starter, and he has a similar skill set to Purdy. I would say it's like a easier transition than I would say Allen does, but who knows? Allen I think has a little more experience in the system, so and CJ Beathard is out there, so you never know. Somebody could come in. I saw what you did on Twitter. So,
Yeah.
none of these guys are safe, including Purdy
Yeah.
with Beathard out there.
Yeah. Kyle knows what to do. It's CJ Beathard time. All right. Here's the running backs. Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, Patrick Taylor, Isaac Garindo, and then of course we got Juice at fullback. Any surprises here for you on the running backs?
I mean, I think the surprising news was Elijah Mitchell went out for the season, right? I don't know. Did you know? Did you know about that injury? I didn't even know that he was that was the case, right? So, to me, that was the most surprising thing that he's not on there. This is obviously a great opportunity for Mason. I think all of us believe, he deserves that role, even if maybe Mitchell was healthy. That Mason has done enough to take that second spot, but I'll leave it up to you, man, because I know you're passionate about what happened with the RBs.
Yeah, well, yes, Elijah Mitchell out for the year. That sucks for him. I think it's over for Elijah Mitchell in San Francisco. Unfortunately, I am excited about Jordan Mason's opportunity. Why is Patrick Taylor on this team, and how did he make it over Cody Schrader? I did the film breakdowns. Schrader, I get it, statistic wise, didn't do anything spectacular. But when you look at the way he runs the football and why those yards weren't happening, it wasn't anything to do with him. Cody Schrader is way better than Patrick Taylor. He was better every day in practice that I was there. Nobody even talks about Patrick Taylor. I don't understand why he's on this roster over Schrader. Now, maybe Schrader, they're trying to sneak on the practice squad. And sometimes that's what this is. Sometimes it's who you think you can sneak on the practice squad and who you think you can't. But to me, Patrick Taylor does not deserve to be on this active roster, in my opinion. I don't know what he brings of value.
Yeah. Let's say if we were trying to steel man the Kyle Shanahan's reasoning, what do you think they saw? I think you just laid one thought process out is maybe they feel like Schrader would be easier to get through waivers than Taylor, but then that would have to be that they're seeing something in Taylor that they think someone else in the league is looking at as well. What did you see in Taylor that stood out as maybe like, because sometimes we've seen the 49ers keep a player because they're good at maybe one aspect, right? Like they're great at blocking, or they're great at pass catching, or great on special teams, something like that. Did you see any flashes in Patrick that potentially, because fourth string rarely is going to see it, so it's usually a special teamer. Was Patrick better in special teams than Schrader? To me, that would be kind of the decision making, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's most likely the reasoning here. Like Schrader obviously is a rookie. Rookies are hit and miss in special teams, and Patrick Taylor's a veteran, so maybe that's exactly what they saw. But I disagree with this, Jolts. I mean, I think you're watching a box score. You can go back and watch the breakdowns. Literally showed play by play. I don't think he was awful at all. I think statistically he was awful. And again, we're talking about the fourth running back. So I'm not trying to spell it out like he's a top two guy on this team. That's not what we're arguing. We're arguing Patrick Taylor, Cody Schrader, and is as runners and as offensive players, Schrader clearly the better player. And again, I think the film backs up that he looked a hell of a lot better than what his stats would tell you. I think he's also a good pass catcher. I think he's a good blocker as well. So for me, it has to be a special teams play. Maybe
And
Schrader, they can sneak on the practice squad. I don't know if that's what the plan is, but
look, it wasn't too long ago Jordan Mason was RB4, and now he's RB2. So, and he was somebody who flashed obviously in preseason and the offseason program, which got him to get a spot over, guys that they drafted at that time. So, it is important. Like these guys that are depth pieces, potentially, you never know. A year or two from now, we've seen it with Breida, we've seen it with now Jordan Mason, like some of these guys, Mostert. So these guys, when they see something good, but then again, we also have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're pretty good at that position, picking the right guys, not drafting the right guys. But picking the right guys once they're in training camp. So, potentially we wait and see.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is like even if I wasn't going to keep Schrader, then I would have kept Breida over Patrick Taylor. But again, the only explanation is the special teams. So we'll go with that one. Wide receivers, we got Deebo Samuel, Ronnie Bell, Brandon Aiyuk, Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings, Chris Conley, and Jacob Cowing. I think the biggest surprise for people here is Ronnie Bell. Is there anything that stands out to you? Are you surprised that Ronnie Bell made this roster? What are your thoughts?
I mean, the biggest news is obviously them breaking Brandon Aiyuk is still on the team and going to be extended long term with this announcement, right? Like that's the big takeaway. Yeah, I mean, I think Conley's on there, right?
Conley is on here, yeah.
Yeah, I want to give him the biggest praise because to me, what he's done through training camp, what he's done, I think he definitely deserves a spot, and I'm glad that he was on he was on a spot. I mean, I think what's sad is the Danny Gray experiment. Another third round wide receiver that they picked doesn't make the roster. I think I don't know if they're IRing him or if he's completely like off the team, but
no, they waived him. They definitely waived him. So
yeah, so we never even got to see him and his speed, what that could do for this offense. But hey, I think looking at it is still a really strong wide receiver bunch.
Yeah, he just couldn't stay healthy. I mean, if I'm choosing between Ronnie Bell, which I think is probably the decision, right? Which is Ronnie Bell and Danny Gray. I think the decision's easy for me. Ronnie Bell over Danny Gray for sure.
Yeah, and even if he didn't have the best training camp in preseason, you saw enough last season, and he's valuable at special teams, potential returner, things like that. I think just that keeps him on the field. And then, like you said, the best ability is availability. So you want to have 6 guys that can suit up.
Yeah, certainly. Now, this is probably the actual biggest surprise is that they only have 2 tight ends currently on the roster, and that's George Kittle and Jake Tunges. It's funny because I kept giving Coach a lot of crap. I kept saying like Jake Tunges is better than Latu, which I did believe, but I just kept drilling it home, assuming that probably neither would make the team. I do think Tunges earned a spot on the roster. I just didn't think he would be the only other tight end to make it with George Kittle. Now, we must preface this with the fact that they still have Ambry Thomas on the active roster. They still have Feliciano on the active roster. Assumption is those guys will eventually go to IR. They'll bring in probably 2 tight ends, at least 1 tight end, whether that's somebody that they've put out on waivers, that they've outright released, or somebody off of another roster. But for now, only carrying 2. What do you think about this one here?
Well, I mean, more breaking news that George Kittle is obviously getting an extension.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think this kind of shows really, that is George Kittle or bust at this position, right? They've let go of guys like Ross Dwelly. Logan Thomas is, you would think is a serviceable guy to keep on your roster. I mean, this guy last season had a pretty decent season, you would think, for a team that, didn't have, let's say, the best quarterback play at the time. So, I mean, obviously, I don't think they really value the position, I guess, outside of George Kittle, because they just know it's going to be him with the majority of the run at that position.
Yeah, they've tried. They've certainly tried, but they can't get it. They really can't figure it out.
Your dream of the 2 tight end sets has died officially.
Yeah. I think it's over. Unfortunately, it is over. Okay, well let me ask you this: out of the guys that they did cut, if they were going to bring one of those guys back, so you've got Saubert, you've got Pline, you've got Logan Thomas, and then you've got Braden Willis and Cam Latu. Out of those guys, if you were to bring one of them back, who would you bring back?
I think Logan Thomas, just
Yeah.
because at that point you want just somebody that I think out of all of them, he's proven to be the most complete. And
Yeah.
obviously, if it's none of those guys are necessarily long-term solutions, might as well bring the guy that you think can impact the most. If George Kittle goes down, that's the guy that I want to step up just because he could play the position and be effective at the position.
Yeah, most certainly. Okay. Offensive line. You've got John Feliciano, Nick Zakel, Jake Brindle, Aaron Banks, Colton McKivitz, Spencer Burford, Jalen Moore, and Dominic Pooney. And then, of course, Trent Williams, not on the active roster because he hasn't yet shown up. So he doesn't count against your 53 the way that Brandon Aiyuk does. Brandon Aiyuk, because he's been in the building, because he has shown up, he's technically a part of your 53-man roster. Trent Williams is not. So we talk about how there's two potential open spots, John Feliciano and Ambry Thomas. Both of them could be sent to IR, assuming at some point Trent Williams gets elevated. That's one of your spots, and then maybe a tight end like we talked about. But yeah, anything surprising here? I know that they didn't bring back, who was it? Kingston, and he was a fan of, or a lot of people were a fan of him, wanted him to make this roster. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kingston was the one that I thought would make it, but then I'm looking at whose spot is he going to take? Because obviously, at this point, it's you need a left tackle, right? So Moore has to be on the roster. He's the only guy that's really played that position consistently outside of Trent Williams that's on the roster. I mean, that's really where it's scary right now, right? Left tackle, like there's nothing on that list that is a strong left tackle for starter, and then even backup. Like I don't even know who's playing that role.
Yeah, they don't have. They only have two tackles on the roster currently. Yeah. Now, assuming obviously Trent Williams comes back, now you've got three. But oh, man, this offensive line is looking rough right now.
But
We'll
what's
see who comes back.
interesting, Jesse, you're right. Like overall, it's looking rough, but I think there's an upgrade at the guard positions, right? Like the guard
Yes, I
positions
agree.
depth there is better. Feliciano coming back mid-season, I think would be better, but definitely the tackle positions are light to say the least.
Yeah, yeah. The O line is fantastic, man. Without Trent Williams, especially, I mean, losing Trent Williams like wouldn't be a big deal. You're right, being super over dramatic. I agree. Defensive line, we've got Robert Beal, Leonard Floyd, Kevin Givens, Sam Okawanu, Jordan Elliott, Yatir Gross Matos, Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins. Anything stand out to you here?
No, I mean, just the amount of new people that are on this list from last season is incredible,
Yeah.
right? But I actually have a lot of faith in this defensive line, Jesse. I know there's not the name recognition like we've had in the past, but I do think that this defensive line fits a lot better than maybe previous defensive lines. And the thing that I like, Jesse, is because of all the new names, they're hungry to prove themselves, and Kosaric does a great job with those type of players. So I do think this defensive line is going to be extremely effective.
Yeah, there's a lot of names. I'm curious to see what the depth actually looks like. I was a little bit disappointed in Jordan Elliott. I think that he's probably your first guy off the bench. As far as interior defensive linemen go, watching him versus the third stringers last week of the Raiders, he was almost non-existent. So hopefully he's better than what he's shown. Mm, I mean, Leonard Floyd's obviously good. Yatir Gross-Matos looks fine, but outside of those two and Bosa, I don't know who the fourth pass rusher is. I like Okuwanu. I like what he showed a lot more so during the training camp portion than he did actually during preseason. So I think he's flashed, but I just don't know if they have that consistent fourth guy. My thing is the 49ers defensive line, they rotate a ton. So it's like, okay, do you really have good pieces that you can rotate through? What does it look like behind those ones? And then the other question is, we know the 49ers are always going to make a midseason trade, most likely. Do they go out again and bring in another defensive lineman at the trade deadline? That might be something looking forward to as well.
Well, I mean, obviously the fourth is Hargrave, right?
You've got Hargrave and you've got but he's an interior pass rusher, right?
Oh, you
I'm
were
talking
talking
about
about
your edge rushers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if any position group, Jesse, deserves benefit of the doubt, it's defensive line, because that's one thing we know. Shanahan, Lynch, they whether whatever you feel about the offensive line, they don't feel that way about the defensive line. We know that they focus on that. We've seen from previous drafts, all of their reaches have been defensive linemen for the most part. And we know Kostrick is the best in the business, so I think that they'll be fine.
Okay. Linebackers, we've got Curtis Robinson, Demetrius Flanagan Fowles, Tatum Bethune, D. Winters, Fred Warner, and Devondre Campbell. No Jalen Graham. A little bit of heartbroken over that one. But overall, what do you think about the linebacker room?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, D. Winters, man, that's gonna be the player that I think to keep an eye on based off of how he does. I think that this linebacking group is gonna look great, especially when um,
Greenlaw.
yeah, Greenlaw comes back, or we're gonna be scratching our head and seeing it could be a weakness as well. So to be determined. Obviously, we got all pro Fred there, and we know his leadership can play a big role in it. But I think D Winters, this is the one that I'm looking to see. Can he step in and play a major role, or Devondre Campbell, is he gonna be able to be the player that we brought him in to be? Those are the two names I think on that list that have to step up.
Yeah, so we know Greenlaw for sure is going to miss minimum the first 4 weeks of the season. I don't think that's a surprise whatsoever. And we also know that Kalia Davis is going to miss the first 4 weeks. We know Elijah Mitchell is done for the season. And then we assume that Feliciano and Ambry Thomas will also end up on IR, guaranteeing they miss the first 4 weeks of the season. So just kind of going through some of the pieces. Let me get to the super chats because I know one of them is Brother Bob talking about Jalen Graham, to which I'll block Brother Bob here promptly. But he says, well, Jalen Graham is definitely buns. Yep, you're blocked. And then he says, damn, Sunil, I agree with you on something. Logan Thomas. There you go.
Brother Bob's finally right about something.
Nice. Nice. So cornerbacks, we've got Charvarius Ward, Ambry Thomas, Isaac Yadam, Darrell Luter Jr., and Renato Green. Don't fret because Diamador Lenore is listed as a defensive back. I guess he can do it all. So they've got him listed there, but technically a corner as well. Any surprises here? They cut Rock Ya-Sin. They cut Womack. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, this position group was the most competitive. All of these, I mean, I think it's hard to say who you would take off the list that, out of Womack and Rock Ya-Sin. Womack was kind of surprising just because, you thought that there was going to be, he was talked about when he was drafted as somebody who could really solidify that third cornerback position. But when you got guys like Green, when you got guys like these guys that are stepping up and playing well, like it's a tough, and I mean it's a good position to be in for the 49ers where you have that much talent at a position group, and something that we're not used to, Jesse. I would say as 49er fans to have this many corners that you're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get it. Ambry Thomas, surprise to a lot of people, but you got to remember that Ambry Thomas can be put on IR. And so I think that's why he makes it, because eventually you're going to free up that roster spot. Obviously, safeties, Jair Brown, Talanoa Hufanga, who's activated now. He's actually activated, which is great to see. You've got George Odom, Malik Mustafa, and then, of course, they've got Demo listed there as well. I don't think there's any surprises here other than Hufanga being activated, which we had hoped for, but now we know that he is fully activated. I don't know that he'll necessarily start or play right away, but he's on the active roster, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, finally some good news
Yeah.
on it front, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And then our special teams, we got Mitch Wishnowsky also back, Jake Moody, and Tabor Pepper. Shout out Tabor Pepper, one of the funniest dudes around. All right, that is the roster. I think there are more moves to come. We'll see who the other tight end is that they bring in, and we'll see if there's any other players from other teams that they bring in. But that's what we are looking at roster-wise. That is, as of now, your 2024 San Francisco 49ers. Okay, let's talk about some of the outside noise that is happening around this team. And I've got 3 pieces that I want to share with you. We'll go one by one. We'll first start with Manti Te'o, and then we'll get to Trent Williams and Brandon Aiyuk and the thoughts that are being shared about those two from Steve Young and Josina Anderson. But Manti Te'o said that he feels like the 49ers look emotionally drained and compared them to one of his old teams that lost heartbreakers back to back in the playoffs in the New Orleans Saints. And he just said that the 49ers, they've climbed the mountain multiple times, but they don't seem to have the same swagger that you are used to them seeing. Now, again, the easy thing to do is to make fun of Manti Te'o because he got catfish and blah, 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 blah. I've seen that all over the internet. But I want to have a real conversation because Manti Te'o was a football player. Manti Te'o was on a team that was emotionally drained, and he's calling out what it is that he sees from the San Francisco 49ers. Any thoughts on this? Do you agree, disagree? Overall, what do you think?
I mean, in theory, I think more than so I think the climbing up the hill and not getting there, I don't really see that as what's draining this team because I think a lot of these players are hungry because of that. I think where the sentiment could be realized is this offseason with Trent not being there, with Aiyuk not being there. To me, I think that's the thing that's probably the most annoying for this team. Most annoying in this offseason is like you don't have this full confidence who's next to you and who you're going to be fighting with to reach that ultimate goal, right? I think this has been a really draining offseason and an offseason where you didn't expect it to be this way, right? Like, oops, sorry. You don't expect it to be. You didn't expect 13 days away from week 1. You don't know who your left tackle is, and you don't know who wide receiver 1 is, right? So I think that isn't the ideal situation to be in when you're vying for a Super Bowl. So yeah, I think that would be more draining. I think it was great to see Diamador Lenore, who has overtaken everybody as my favorite 49er now, Jesse, is Diamador Lenore. Just the way he claps back and the way he has his team's back in all phases. So to me, the way he clapped back was great because I think that's a big sign to show that at least the players might not be feeling it. You know what I mean? Like we might be feeling it as a fan base. On paper, it would seem that potentially that could be the case, but Diamador Lenore is Mr. Swagger, and he's coming back and like, nah, that's not the case. When you hear Brock Purdy talk, it doesn't seem like that's the case. When you hear Debo talk, it doesn't seem like that's the case. So like, to me, I think that maybe there's difference between what the players actually feel and what we might be thinking. But I don't think it's unfair criticism from Manti Te'o to think that potentially could be a thing, because it could. It could absolutely, not so much they keep getting close and not making it, but more just the turmoil that this offseason has been.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I agree with him to a certain extent, and only because I was there, and it was something that I noticed right away. Last year, this team during practice had so much swagger. I mean, every single day. You knew this team was ready to go chase a Super Bowl. And then, of course, they carried themselves out in the regular season, and they started out phenomenally. And there was just a feeling with this team very, very early on in those practices. This year, that feeling wasn't there. And I talked about it with coach at nauseum. I feel like when we were at training camp, just how flat it felt compared to last year. And so Matt Mayoko's come out and said it. I've heard Larry say it. And now, Manti Te'o is pointing it out. It may not be the end of the world, and it may absolutely be, and fairly, because you are missing two of the best players on this team. Two leaders, by the way. They're not just good players, but they're leaders as well. Brandon Aiyuk is a tone setter in practices. He's a tone setter. Trent Williams is a tone setter in games. I mean, talk about a guy who's willing to scrap at any time. I mean, that's Trent Williams. So without those guys, it could feel that way. And I think it could be as simple as, if you get them back, you feel great about it. But definitely there is something there. I don't think Manti Te'o's off his rocker at all. And it is an interesting contrast in how this team is being discussed by guys like Manti Te'o, by guys like Julian Edelman, who are not a part of this organization. It's in stark contrast to the way that this team used to be discussed, because the way this team used to be discussed was, man, this is my first time seeing the 49ers up front. They're just bigger than everybody else. Like there's no team in the league that is built the way that they're built. That's how people used to talk about the Niners. And now it's like, well, yeah, this team seems selfish. This team seems to act like they've won a Super Bowl, even though they haven't. Those are things that were said by Edelman. This team seems emotionally drained. So, this is not what we're used to hearing. Will it matter? Maybe not, but it is something to pay attention to, I think.
Sure. And I think Manti Te'o's conclusion might be right. I don't think it's because of the reason that he said, right? So
for sure,
to me, I think it's more the tumultuous offseason, not having, like you mentioned, not just two of your best players, but two of your leaders on the field that impact the energy of the team in a very big way. And and once again, I think it's shocking, right? I don't think people thought Trent Williams was going to hold out, and I don't think people thought that Brandon Aiyuk would take this long to get done. So I think that's another impact, is you just didn't expect this to be happening so close to the season starting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's move on to Josena Anderson, who had some strong words when talking about Trent Williams. And she said that Trent Williams wants to be paid like that. And everybody knows that when you repeat a word, you really, really mean it. So when you could say, hey, he wants to be paid. But when you say paid, he wants to be paid. Everybody knows what that means. So he wants to be paid like the important piece that he knows that he is. This is on the heels of another report basically saying that he will not be around the team if he doesn't get the money he's expecting. He's dug in. Trent Williams is, and I don't think anybody's surprised by this. I think pretty much everybody knew that if he didn't get paid, that he wouldn't be around. The thought, though, was, listen, he just wants to miss training camp. Like, they'll work it out. Some people are even like, the deal's in place already, like super optimistic, or just wait until training camp's over. He just doesn't want to practice. I think it's a little bit more than that, because it's over. Training camp's officially over. The season is officially here. All right. We are done with training camp. We are done with preseason. Every day that goes by that Trent Williams is not here, it shows that there's something real going on and that they have not come to an agreement. And right now, the conversations from the insiders are they're not close. They are not close to an agreement. for whatever reason, that one is a bit surprising. Where are you at on your thoughts with this Trent Williams situation?
So one thing I want to make clear, there's no such thing as a deal's in place unless it's been announced in my eyes now. No such thing
Yeah,
as a
for sure.
deal's in place.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, how many times did we feel like it was so close with Aiyuk,
Right.
either trade or signed, right?
Right. Nothing's real until it's real. But yeah, I mean, look, this is on brand for Trent Williams. Whether you agree with it or not, one thing you could know about Trent Williams is he's about his business and he's not bluffing, right? And whether you agree with his stance or not, this is a real thing, and he's not somebody that's gonna back down. 49ers are not getting a hometown discount. There aren't any things like that. I think he looks at it and he's like, I could be good without football if I'm gonna put my body through another season. I need to make sure that it's financially what I want it to be, type of thing, because I'd rather be healthy and not put my body through that, even though he's under contract, right? Which I think is the difficult part. Is like, dude, they made you a certain type of player. They made you the highest paid at the position when your contract was up, and you signed that contract, and now you're trying to renegotiate that when you still have years on your deal. Look, we all know how important Trent Williams is. We just don't know how long he's going to be there, right? And the 49ers are already in the cap situation where they can't afford to pay a guy 2 years guaranteed money if he's only going to play for one, right? And I think that's really what it boils down to. But, and I've been Mr. Optimistic throughout the season. If Trent Williams isn't a 49er, Jesse, this team can't win a Super Bowl, right? It's actually to the point where it's like, you got to start looking at, like, you should have, and maybe I'm moving forward in the topics, but it shows the negligence of this front office, whether it's Shanahan, whether it's Lynch, the fact that they didn't plan for having a backup plan if Trent Williams didn't come back. Like, they just thought that he was going to be there. So you didn't draft any of these tackles, and you didn't put that as like your number one thing. Hey, we got to get this moving forward. You decided, hey, we need to find our future wide receiver before we find our future left tackle. Like, that was the decision that you made. It is biting them in the butt at this moment, because I think it does take this team down a notch, where before, I think I would say there's no team that could really beat them in the NFC. Now I think they're one of, three teams that could become, NFC champs. And so that's how important Trent Williams is. Only because, though, Jesse, the 49ers didn't do what they needed to do to pick a guy like Soleimani or Rosen, all those guys that, you guys are looking at. Marco was real big on these guys. They decided to not make that a priority, and now they either have to pay for a guy that could play the position, but the future is gonna be impacted because of it, or you eat your loss and you go into the season with not nearly as good of an offensive line. Like, one of like, you go from a top 10 offensive line to maybe a bottom 10 offensive line with just that one player not being there.
Yeah, how much better would we feel if Kingsley Suamataia was on this team? I mean, he's done nothing but show out. As much as we're excited about Pooney, Suamataia has looked just as good, if not better, in the preseason. And it's preseason. I don't want to get way ahead of myself. That doesn't mean that a player is going to be good. I know we're excited about Pooney. There's no guarantee that he's going to be really good, although he looks like he will be. But all those things that we say about Pooney, and as excited we are about him being the right guard of this team and potentially the future left guard, we would be just as excited right now about Suamataia playing left tackle. We'd be like, yeah, it sucks Trent's not here, but we're not dead in the water with Suamataia. If it's more, we're dead in the water. I'm sorry. That guy's a turnstile at left tackle. So, yeah, we would be looking a lot different. And, it was the number one offensive lineman draft we've had in a long time, especially at the tackle position, and the 49ers came away with 0 tackles, and there were quality ones to be had for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you could have had Sulamanti and Pooney, and then all of a sudden we're looking at the future and saying, yo, like the window is back. There's nobody talking about a closed window at that point because the offense is still going to be good, right? And young, right? So yeah, it's unfortunate, but back to the question, I think that I believe everything that Josina Anderson is saying. I do think that this is at an impasse. What I'm fearful of, Jesse, is I don't think that the 49ers are going to cave. I just don't think they can. Like, they're over the cap next season without all of these guys that they still, without Brandon Aiyuk, without, the roster being filled in. And I don't think Trent's willing to guarantee that he's going to play for another 2 years. So I don't know what the 49ers do at this point.
Man, okay. Well, let's talk about Steve Young, because he was a little bit more dismissive or understanding, I should say, when it came to Trent Williams. He talked about, I wish it would have been done sooner, but I totally get it. He's the best left tackle in the game, and there's no guaranteed money, and he was fine with that. But when it came to Brandon Aiyuk, he had some pretty harsh words. I'll read the whole quote. He says, "But Brandon, because of his youth and because he's not going to set the market yet, wants to set the market, says, I want to be traded," and then goes through this. I don't know how to put it. But it's like, bro, if you want to tear up the contract and do something big, then you might want to go on the 5th year and go prove it out to make sure that everybody is on board with you setting the market. Or if you're going to ask to be traded, then when they make a trade that works for them, you got to say you're up for it. You don't say, oh no, that doesn't work for me, because then it was like, well, what do you want? So he's not a fan of the way that Brandon Aiyuk has gone about his business. What do you think about Steve Young and his comments?
It's interesting because you can't say, I think Steve Young is pretty fair, and he's really pro player. You know what I mean? So like his history has been pro player. He's not just a homer that's just like do whatever the team, because he was a player, right? He's not in the front office of the 49ers. He's always been a player. And even in that statement, like you mentioned, he understood Trent Williams' predicament and was fine with it. To me, it's like, does he have some insider knowledge about what is going on? Because I think there's like a lot of people that are talking about, they know the situation and all this stuff. For Steve Young to come out and say these things, I think maybe he's heard some things behind. This is just my, I don't have any inside sources or anything. This is just me from 1,000 miles away, just going off of what he's saying. That maybe these are some things that Brandon Aiyuk is misplaying or kind of waffling, and it's hard really for anything to get resolved because he's not committing to a deal, whatever deal they put down. He's not committing to a trade. So it's like, and the 49ers aren't going to pay him CeeDee Lamb money, Jefferson money. So it's like at this point, play on the 5th year option, or take a deal or accept a trade. And I think the fact that Steve Young's saying it, I think to me, it adds some validity that potentially that's what's actually happening. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely what the organization feels. It's like, hey, you said you wanted to be traded. We found some trades and you said no. You want to be paid. We found you places that'll pay you and you've said no. You want to go to these specific teams and you want to be paid. That's not necessarily on the menu here. So what are we doing? We've made our final offer. Are you accepting that? Are you good with playing on the 5th year option? Or are we trading you? Make a decision. I think is the way the organization feels. I think Brandon Aiyuk is like, listen, I want to be here. I've always wanted to be here. Just match what the Pittsburgh Steelers are willing to do. I'm not even asking you to match the highest bidder, which was, the Browns and the Patriots. Just match what they're willing to do and let's get to work. And so they're just stuck at a gridlock here, but we're at crunch time. We're the final 13 days. I feel like the 49ers can't trade him at this point. It's too late for that. They either are going to come to an agreement, or I say call his bluff and make him play on the 5th-year option. And the reason that I say call his bluff is because I'm not sure he's actually willing to sit out games. Now, I know he said he's willing to sit out games, but I also know that when push came to shove and it came down to him coming to training camp or sitting out, he came to training camp. When push came to shove and they said, you're going to get fined if you don't show up to a preseason game, he showed up to the preseason game. So I'm calling his bluff if that's what it comes down to. I'm not trading him at this point. This team needs him. They are trying to win a Super Bowl. Those draft picks aren't doing anything for you. And truth be told, if you trade him for a second and a fourth, let's assume that's what the Steelers are offering. That's pretty much what we've heard. A, that's not helping you this year. And B, if that team makes the playoffs, you undersold what he's probably worth. I mean, future draft picks are always worth essentially a round later than what they are in the current draft. So if you're in a draft cycle right now and you're trading for a future pick and it's a second round pick, really the value is a current third round pick. But you're not even in a draft process. So what is the value for those draft picks? They're not helping you win now. This team needs him. So I would call his bluff. That's where I'm at if I was the 49ers. I understand where Aiyuk's coming from. I've been team Aiyuk the whole time. But if I'm the 49ers at this point, I'm not willing to trade you. I'm just not. Because what precedence does it set? If we trade him to a team that he wants to, let's say it's even worse. Let's say it ends up being Washington. Let's say Washington does get back into this and they trade him to Washington, the team that everybody knows he preferred to play for. Steelers were number 2, 49ers obviously in the mix. What tone are you setting? You can sit out and play this game all off season, and if you don't want to be here, it's fine. Like we'll acquiesce. Well, not only are we going to trade you so that you can get paid, but we're going to trade you to the team of your choice. You can't allow that to be dictated by a player. Absolutely not.
Right. Especially because, like Aiyuk was my favorite player. He's number 2 at this point because Diamond Lenore is now my favorite player on the team. But Aiyuk, I think that he's a top 5 receiver. But he's never going to get that type of opportunity with the 49ers to show that because he's not going to get the targets of what a top 5 receiver gets. Just that doesn't work in Shanahan's offense. So if a player of his, let's say, caliber is able to do that, then, anybody in the league is going to be able to kind of throw their weight around and be able to do that. So, yeah, I totally agree with you, especially in a league like the NFL. I could see in the NBA, which is more player friendly, the NFL isn't that type of league. They're not going to let the players get that much power to where they can dictate where they go and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, but once again, I think it goes back to the morale of the team. Like, I mean, what do you think, Jesse? Because I know you and I have both been team Aiyuk this whole time. At what point can that ever change for you? At what point is it like, okay, well, you have to make the decision to just be like, okay, I'm going to play on this 5th year. You're not going to give me what I want. Just guarantee me you're not going to franchise me. I'll play on the 5th year and then let me be going to free agency like I want to. Like, I don't know. Like, to me, it's just like nobody's winning at this point. Ayuk's not winning. The team's not winning. Both, like, the players that he loves are getting affected. I don't know. It's a little confusing.
It's weird. It's hard to pick a side at this point because now it's like we're so late in the process that we're here. The season is here.
I think like at this point, the team isn't going to pay you what you want. The team the 49ers need to know Aiyuk isn't going to take any deal that we want. It's like, just play the 5th year and, we'll next off season, you're either going to get traded or we're going to break you off with what you deserve type of thing based off of the season that you had. I think that's ultimately where we need to be at because how much longer? Like, how many more what's going to change from now until the season starts that's going to change anything? I just don't think anything else is going to change.
I think the 49ers made a lot of mistakes along the way with this whole
Yep.
process, right? They wait. We've talked about it all. Okay. So I'm not going to rehash all the mistakes that they've made because I think we agree they made those mistakes. However, right now, you can't continue to compound on those mistakes. You've made those mistakes. You can't fix them in how this situation has gone. And so what you can't do is play the back and forth game anymore. You literally got to say, these are your options. This is our best, whatever that offer is, whatever that true best offer is, this is the best offer. We're not changing it. We're not going back and forth. It's this fifth year option or traded to the Steelers or whoever. You've got 48 hours to make a decision. Otherwise, we're just going to say fifth year option. That's it. We're moving on. We're ready for the season. And you're either showing up or you're not being paid those games that you sit out, and we'll see you in week 11. That's really where I would be if I'm the 49ers. You can't continue to compound on the mistakes that you already made. That's why I've been Team Aiyuk. But at this point, the team has to put their foot down and force a decision to be made. They can't wait any longer. They just can't. And they got to be willing to live with the consequences. If Brandon Aiyuk is willing to sit and he's not willing to accept the agreement and make a decision, and if that means he misses the first 11 games of the season, then you have to be willing to live with those consequences.
Sure.
But you have to force his hand at this point.
I agree 1,000%. At this point, you got to start focusing on football. And that's unfortunately where I feel like this offseason hasn't had enough focus, is just on the football.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating part. Before we get to the super chats, I do want to give a shout out to the sponsor of the show, Underdog Fantasy. Whether you're a fantasy football player, you like to have some skin in the game with some more or less, Underdog has you covered. Link is pinned to the top of the chat. It's also in the description. Promo code LSS will get you a deposit match of up to $1,000 and a free pick. Thank you so much, Underdog, for sponsoring Last Second Sports. Let's get over to these super chats, and then I'm going to let you choose the last topic because we have a couple sitting here. And I got to run because I got to get these kids to bed before I got my NFC West roundtable. So I'll let you choose the last topic here in a minute. But Dave Barclay says, who's your biggest surprise, keep or release? I don't think there's massive surprises. I think for me, it was the running back position. I think the biggest surprise is that Elijah Mitchell's season is done. That's what the biggest surprise is at this point. Brother Bob says, damn, that's twice. I agree with Sunil. I owe you a beer. And then Shady Luke, Eagles fan, says Isaac Guerrero is going to shock y'all. Well, I mean, I think there's no doubt he's already proven that he can be a special teams ace potentially. But ultimately, what we want to see from Isaac Guerrero is, can he be a good running back as well in this system? This system is not for everybody. We'll see. We'll see how he plays out. But at the very least, he is on this roster. Okay. We had two topics remaining that we didn't get to. So I'll let you choose, Sunil. Do you want to talk about this draft class, or do you want to talk about concerns going into this season?
Let's talk about the concerns.
All right. Let's do it. I mean, we both agree the concerns are Aiyuk and Trent. But other than that, when you're just looking at this roster, you're looking at this team, what concerns do you have going into week 1 and this 2024 season?
Can I talk about a bigger thing that I think is a concern?
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
So I know that I am the 49er homer. I'm a huge Kyle Shanahan fan. Mm-hmm. And those things have been because culture, have been because they constantly put out one of the best rosters. They're constantly competitive. And I felt like every year we have a chance to actually be a Super Bowl contender. And I talked to you about this. I don't know if it was yesterday or this morning, but I was like, I asked the question, is this a trend that we can look at moving forward? And my biggest criticism of this offseason is the strategy didn't change when the circumstances have changed. And to me, it's been, obviously there's still football to be played, and we're projecting versus actual facts. But the fact that you didn't think far enough ahead to draft a tackle with your first round pick or second round pick, the fact that you still are waiting till the last hour to re-sign players on your team, even though you know that you have a cap situation that you didn't have to deal with earlier in your tenure, that you could get away with that because you had so much cap flexibility. Those are two things to me, Jesse, that are like, man, this could be what we continue to see year after year, because they've decided they're just deciding that, hey, we don't want to get it done this way. And what's interesting to me, Jesse, is the comment that John Lynch said in his presser was, I wish we could get these done. I always wish we could get these done earlier. So it's like, why aren't they? If your GM wants to get it done, who's making that decision? I know people are going to say it's Kyle Shanahan, but I don't know if Kyle Shanahan is getting involved in the money as in depth as people say he is, right? Does Parag have a lot of power? Is it York? Like, who is deciding to use this strategy when it comes to the money, right? Because it's like, we know Brandon Aiyuk would have been signed for a steal of a deal if they did it earlier. Like, he's mentioned that, right? Hushmanzada's mentioned that. And we're only going to get trickier cap situations moving forward, with Purdy about to get paid, with, Diamond Lenore. We know how many roster spots they're going to have to re-sign with free agents next season. If their strategy isn't going to change, are we constantly going to have these tumultuous off seasons? And at this point, I would say yes. And the fact that why I'm so down about it is we'll see, but we'll see this season how it plays out. But even the optimistic person in me believes that this is going to impact the product on the field and how competitive they're actually going to be with the top teams. Are they still going to make the playoffs? Yes. But I'm talking about Super Bowl contention. The top teams, they're not dealing with what we're dealing with right now. So they have a leg up. And I don't think the 49ers are good enough to give that up to compete with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Chiefs are obviously the model citizen here because they're the team that continues to win Super Bowls. But they just made their center the highest paid center in the NFL, and they knew he wanted to be paid. Same thing with Butker; he wanted to be paid. They had some guys that wanted to be paid, and they took care of him early. They learned their lesson from last year, I think, when it came to Jones, who did sit out the first game. They're like, hey, we can't do this again. And so you would hope that the 49ers would have, they played with fire a little bit when it came to Bosa. Luckily, he showed up week 1. You would have hoped that maybe they would have learned that, you know what, we've seen it 2 years in a row with Debo and now Bosa. Maybe we should get these guys in earlier. And I'm not saying everything's their fault. We don't know exactly what goes on behind the scenes, but man, I sure would think that early conversations would have known where you were headed and given you a preview. When you have your exit interview with Trent Williams, listen, Trent, we know you're going to be 36. You're the best left tackle in the game. We assume you want to come back for another year. Is that the case? Okay, everything good. And then at that point, it would be on Trent to be like, yeah, everything's good except for, I need some guaranteed money. Like, we're going to have to talk about that this offseason. All right, well, at least whenever you want to tackle it, you know that that's coming, right? And maybe they did know, but if they did, shame on them for waiting this long to get it done once again. And then with Brandon Aiyuk, hey, we know that your time is to get paid. Do you want to be a 49er long term? Is that in your plans? Do you not want to be a 49er long term? Are you good? What are you looking for? Just some of the basis. 3-year deal, 4-year deal, just so we have an idea of what we're looking at as we approach the offseason. And really, when Brandon Aiyuk and his agent immediately, as soon as the season ends, is like, hey, let's talk. We want to talk deal. And you back burner it, and you started it earlier than you normally do. But earlier for you was like May. Well, man, you kind of missed your window to set the market. At some point, you got to realize you got to set the market. And you should be looking at your financials. Maybe Brandon Aiyuk tells you, yes, I want to be a 49er long-term and I want a 4-year deal. And this is, I want to set the market or whatever. And you're looking at it going, well, our future books say that that's not possible. So let's trade him during the draft and get this thing done. But these decisions have to be made earlier. You have to make a decision one way or another. Are we keeping this player? Are we getting rid of this player? And that goes through the whole roster. And once you've made that decision and you've made the concrete decision, if the answer is we're keeping Aiyuk, at least for this year, then we're not willing to trade you. That conversation's not going to happen. Let's negotiate. Okay, if we can't come to a deal, then the 5th-year option is what we're going to go off of, and we'll figure it out next year. But at least you've made the decision. We're not trading this player. But it sounds like they weren't going to trade that player. And then when it became an issue, you are going to trade the player. They keep going back and forth, and that's where the concern comes in. It's like, man, why aren't you getting to these things earlier? And how much heartache are you causing yourself that you don't need to cause? How much money above and beyond are you paying some of these guys that if you would have just let them set the market, everybody else would have fallen in line behind them and you could have been done and paid these guys good money, probably more than you want, but not as much as you're eventually going to pay anyways. And at least they're there for training camp. I think there is a lot of little mistakes here, and we've seen it enough now to where we have to say this happens more often than not because the 49ers are letting it happen and choosing to do business a certain way. This is not unique to this year. This is not unique to Trent Williams and Brandon Aiyuk. This is now a trend. This is something they do need to look at, address, and change going forward because it's not ideal. It's just not.
And once again, to me, it's fine until it starts impacting the product on the field. And now it's starting to seem, at least the trends are like we haven't seen them play yet. But if this season doesn't end up looking good, you have to say now you're impacting the product on the field. And at that point, you're fair game. Like at that point, criticism is definitely necessary and warranted. And I think they're getting to that point in my eyes, Jesse. And that's my biggest concern, is because before, whatever the mistakes, whatever the issue, it didn't affect the play. It didn't affect the team that you put on the field. And now we're at a point where it is affecting the team that you're putting on the field. You don't have the left tackle. You don't have the wide receiver one. Like, how are you going to compete with the Kansas City Chiefs? How are you competing with the Ravens, the Lions? They're not that much better. You know what I mean? To where you could take out 2 All-Pros and still be able to like compete. So that's where that's where my biggest concern is.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother Bob says, Sunil, are you happy we kept Robinson over Graham?
I mean, I don't think either of them are necessarily impact players right now. I think, like I said, I named the 2 linebackers that we need to see, and that's Winters and the Devontae or whatever.
Devontae Campbell, yeah. Not the answer you were looking for, Brother Bob. GTC Real says, wait, we got rid of Graham? What the F, bro? I know, man. I know. It sucks. I love Graham. Shady Luke says the front office needs to get these deals done before it even becomes a major subject. That's what I appreciate about Howie. Lynch is a smart-ass guy. A smarty-ass guy is what he said. But he's an Eagles fan, and he's used to deals getting done early. That's what he's, for better or for worse, I mean, we can say 49ers are better than the Eagles. Who cares? Shut your mouth. But they were just in a Super Bowl 2 years ago as well. They've won one in the last 7 years. Clearly, they know what they're doing over there. Not that the 49ers don't, but, maybe tweak some of the things that you do. You can always be a little bit better. You can always do better. You can always be a little bit better. And I think it is to the point where the 49ers need to kind of switch some things up. So I'm with you. I'm definitely with you on that one. So, Neil, thank you so much, as always, for joining me on Tuesday. I'll be back at 9 p.m. Eastern, so in about 53 minutes to be exact, over on Roundtable Sports NFC West Roundtable. We'll be discussing the 53-man roster. We'll be discussing the state of the division and talking a little bit of crap to the rest of the NFC West, the Seahawks, the Cardinals, and the Rams, which, by the way, the Rams lost one of their premier players, traded him for peanuts. And I know that the Rams representative, Jake, is going to be beside himself. So I'm excited to see it. Brother Bob says, Sunil 3 for 3, culture, welcome to the Late Show. All right, Brother Bob. You're not going to steal my friend from me. Sorry. You're blocked, by the way. I don't know. I got to figure out how to do that. Much love to y'all. Stay blessed. Be back soon. Peace.